Greetings. This is Mehl-Madrona speaking to you from Eastern Maine Medical Center, Family Medicine Residency, and representing our Makwi team. Makwi is a Penobscot word meaning togetherness, and Makwi is a project for which we were funded to provide support and training to the local tribes in Maine, of which there are 5, and in terms of delivering medication assisted treatment for opiate use disorder. And so I want to share some of the things we learned about collaborating with indigenous communities for research and service delivery. So we want to thank the Wabanaki people. That's the collective name for the 5 tribes of Maine. It means the people of the dawn. And we want to thank SAMHSA for funding our project. And I want to acknowledge the rest of the Makwi team, our principal investigator, Dr. Benjamin Hirth, co-investigator Dr. Eric Brown, and a number of other people, including Sharon Toma of Wabanaki Health and Wellness, Samreen Fatima of the Clinical Research Center of Eastern Maine, Janet Bailaron, Barbara Sarando of the same entity, Christy Ricker of the Penobscot Nation Health Clinic, Shannon Petit, Barbara Mangi from Wabanaki Health and Wellness, and Jennifer Trumbo from the Clinical Research Center, and many others. So programs need to be grounded in indigenous knowledge. The approach needs to be participatory, and we need to think in terms of systems. Implementation needs to include 4 elements: a culture-centered approach, community engagement, systems thinking, and integrated knowledge translation. So the culture-centered approach is facilitated by providing opportunities for community members to have a voice and to feel a sense of agency in the project, for the researchers or the clinicians to reflect upon their own biases, behavior, and approaches, and to provide resources to address structural challenges. We transform through asserting indigenous self-determination, challenging power imbalances, and for the researchers and clinicians to be self-reflective and to adjust our behavior to enhance cultural safety. So, indigenous perspectives on holism and well-being are typically based on cultural values, on beliefs and traditions passed down among the generations, especially beliefs in the unity of mind, body, and spirit. A common indigenous belief is that all life is interrelated, including the environment and the universe, and that holism is the best way to understand health and well-being. In the Lakota language, it's spoken of as Mitakwiasan, that all of the relatives together, the nation of all of the relatives, is one. And so intervention needs to be culturally appropriate and relevant, as well as supported and owned by the community. And I bring Lakota into the discussion because I am Lakota, though they would have different words for this in Maine. So systems thinking addresses the complexity of the local context and the variety of levels and determinants of health problems. Integrated knowledge translation emphasizes co-design and co-production with the end users of a program in developing and implementing an intervention for the purpose of transferring knowledge and enhancing sustainability. And IKT also involves the researchers and end users in various levels of partnership to ensure shared ownership and address barriers early in the process. So, high levels of community engagement are associated with greater implementation effectiveness and improved health outcomes and health equity. Community engagement is a process of collaborating with groups who are directly affected by a particular health issue, or with groups who are working with those affected. And in our case, we had community focus groups about the opiate problem in each community and about how people felt about the implementation of medication-assisted treatment. So one of the first things that we did was to take the OCAP course. And the OCAP stands for Ownership, Control, Access, and Possession. It's based in Canada, and it represents the principles that we used and that we believe everyone should use to interact with indigenous communities or First Nations in Canada. So OCAP allows a community to make decisions regarding with whom information is collected, used, and shared. So ownership refers to the relationship of First Nations to their cultural knowledge, data, and information, meaning that they own it. We don't. We external researchers or clinicians do not own their data. A community or group owns information collectively in the same way that an individual owns his or her personal information. C, or control, affirms that First Nations and their communities and representative bodies are within their rights to seek control over all aspects of research and information management processes that impact them. And that means from start to finish. Access means that First Nations must have access to information and data about themselves and their communities, regardless of where it is held. It also refers to the right of First Nations to manage and make decisions regarding access to their information. And of course, we need standardized formal protocols in place. Possession refers to physical control of the data, and it is the mechanism by which ownership is asserted and protected. So these are the OCAP principles that we studied and implemented in our work with the 5 tribes of Maine to assist them, to support them, to facilitate their implementation of medication-assisted treatment for opiate use disorder. And one of the principal tools that we used in this process consisted of talking circles. So circularity is tremendously important in indigenous communities, and the talking circle is deeply rooted in the traditional practices of indigenous people in North America, and recently we discovered also in Australia, where they call them yarning circles. And in fact, I came across a humorous article to me from the Australian Technical University wondering how it was that indigenous people in North America learned about yarning circles from indigenous Australians. Well, apparently good ideas emerge simultaneously in multiple locations. So, um, so talking circles were an important part of our process of engendering community engagement and of also of exploring people's feelings within a clinic about medication assisted treatment. So the talking circle is often credited to the woodland tribes in the Midwest of North America who used it as a parliamentary procedure. And typically, um, one would talk around a circle until unanimous agreement was reached, which could take a while because um, Native American democracy was based upon coming to unanimous agreement as opposed to majority rules. So, circles are, of course, sacred and represent the interconnectedness of all things. So, um, so in a talking circle, people have the opportunity to express their thoughts on an issue um, until everyone is completed, until everyone is done, until a collaborative consensus is reached. So it's a ceremony in which people learn how to listen. So the group sits in a circle, a talking stick is passed around the circle. Typically, the process is begun with a prayer by the convener of the circle, and the person who holds the stick speaks as long as they wish. No one interrupts them. The stick is passed to the left, except in Haudenosaunee territory, where it's passed to the right, and each person speaks as long as they wish. So these circles help us to better understand how our behavior affects others, whose behavior in turn feeds back to affect us. Um, so, generally, one speaks into the circle and not to a particular individual. That the focus is on the center and not the periphery. So, if you don't hold the talking stick, you don't talk. Now, that's interesting in relation to a study we found that showed that, on average, physicians allow a patient to talk for 18 seconds before they interrupt. Talking circle teaches people not to interrupt, to allow people to talk until they're done. So in a talking circle, you might be thinking of a better story you could tell, of advice that you could offer, um, reminding yourself of things you need to do, or generally drifting, but that's not the idea. The idea is to actually listen, which is the most powerful gift to offer another person. So this deep listening in Australia, in the dialect of the Gulpa Ngawal people, is called Dadiri. Jacques Lacan called it listening without judgment or interpretation, and Carl Rogers called it unconditional positive regard. So it offers people the opportunity to speak their truth into the circle. And what is said is unpredictable, and as people listen to each speaker, they are changed, and what they would have said changes. So, um, so these are healing circles, talking circles, hochokas in the Lakota language, people who sit together and listen to each other. So what does this methodology prevent? Reactive communication. It fosters deep listening and reflection in conversation. It prevents directly responsive communication. It provides a means for people to speak and to be heard who might otherwise not speak or not be heard. So, another aspect of working within indigenous communities is respect for elders. And we certainly discovered that and endeavored to implement that. So, traditional elders are people recognized within communities as those who have particular skills, knowledge, and training and experience in a variety of areas, ranging from the making of baskets here in Maine, to the making of canoes, to beading, to healing, to communicating, to language. Um, Typically, elders hold the knowledge of the practices of their tribal group or community. They're knowledge keepers. And so, when one comes into a community, one must determine who are the elders and how should they be properly approached, properly addressed, and properly approached in order to facilitate community engagement. Next, I want to talk about intensive immersion experiences in communities, which is something that we're also doing. We have a rotation in which our family medicine residents are intensively immersed in indigenous community. And so this has been studied in Australia. Here's a paper from the International Journal for Equity and Health about this process. We're in the midst of writing our own paper about our experiences with immersing residents in community, but it's been uniformly very positive. So it's positive because local people are honored as teachers to teach the residents how to interact with members of the community. And so the residents learn about community engagement, they directly experience cultural exchange, they participate in interprofessional collaboration, and we give them a week of pre-placement cultural training to prepare them for this process. And this training has been important in terms of their assistance in implementation of Makwi. So, in addition to that, I want to talk a little bit about community-based participatory research, which is what we're trying to do with the communities with which we work, and which seems to be the most effective approach for intervening, implementing, collaborating with indigenous communities. And what that means is that we all sit together as equals. And the talking circle facilitates this, that we want to create full, meaningful partnerships with complete transparency and no hidden analysis of data, no hidden interpretation of data. We want to provide the opportunity for community members to participate in data analysis as much as they wish. So, this is a study that shows how effective community-based participatory methods are. It comes from the Canadian Journal on Aging, And their aim was to show um, that it worked. And it does. So, implementation of these methods results in a process of engagement in which work, effective, meaningful, useful work, can be done. And it's so the transparency is so important because of the previous historical abuse by researchers and clinicians of First Nations or indigenous communities. So our goal, and this has been our goal in Makwi, and it should be our goal in all research, is to ensure that indigenous perspectives are central to and reflected in the research process, even when using, even when doing secondary analyses of data sets. So, um, so when we first proposed this workshop, we had the idea that we would do small talking circles and that everyone present would get to experience a talking circle and to see how talking circles change our perspective. And so, what I want to invite you to do in your environment, wherever you are, is to organize a talking circle and to bring together a group of people who share an interest in a problem or an issue or a process. And so, in other words, to collect the stakeholders and to assemble them and to sit everyone in a circle and to produce an object. You know, we use beautifully decorated staffs or sticks, but one can use anything. So to produce a talking stick of some kind, and for the convener of the circle to make a statement that shows respect for everyone who has come. And in indigenous country, that's done through a prayer. Um, it could simply be done through acknowledging the effort that everyone has made to come together in this place at this time to consider a particular problem. And so the convener states the problem or the issue at hand and then passes the stick to the left, and that person speaks their mind, speaks to the center of the circle, um, whatever they wish to say, and the stick continues to be passed. And this is the modern world. You may not be able to speak until consensus is reached. You may have time constraints, but we hope that the stick will go around at least 3 times, if not 4, because we've discovered that each time the conversation grows deeper, and on the third pass, it becomes particularly more likely to be profound. And a fourth pass is ideal because it takes some warming up to speak our minds. And of course, this is a method that can be used in any work or cultural setting. And when it's timed, when it has to stop at a particular time, it's good to have a timer that that goes off so that people can prepare themselves for the fact that this will end potentially before everyone has come to a unanimous conclusion. So, um, so I just want to say a few things about Makwi. We have been successful in forming partnerships with communities in Maine and with providing training in motivational interviewing, in uh, screening and referral processes, in modifying counseling techniques for indigenous people in a setting of medication assisted treatment. Um, and we've we've um, been able to interact with all five of the communities in Maine and to form community partnerships and to facilitate communities doing the things that they need and want to do in reference to the opiate problem within their communities. And we hope to continue to provide that consultation and facilitation for some time to come. And so, in concluding, um, as academics, clinicians, and researchers, we have to drop the idea that we know best. We have to drop the idea that we know what people should do, and if they would only listen to us and do what we tell them, everything would be fine. Because that's not necessarily the case. We have to embrace the idea that people can solve their own problems, that people have the knowledge needed to solve their own problems, and that what's important is to facilitate communication about among those people so that the problems can be addressed. And to listen deeply to the wisdom that exists already within communities, and to work with that wisdom and with those communities to move toward a commonly developed goal, which is defined by the community, to follow the principles of OCAP, that the community owns, controls, accesses the data that results, to be completely transparent and participatory in the work that's being done. And so I will stop here. I believe there may be some time for questions and discussion on the chat group or not. I'm still getting used to this format of virtuality. And I thank you for listening, for your attention. The one thing I can say about COVID, now that we wear scrubs all the time, it certainly reduced my dry cleaning bill. So there's always a silver lining in every cloud. So thank you again for listening on behalf of myself and Makwi.